Continued for a third day. Today, pro-government supporters were out in force too, but there were also counter-demonstrations. Anti-government protests have sprung up in several Iranian towns and cities in recent days. In Kerman province today, demonstrators chanted "Down with the dictator." They threw stones during clashes with riot police. There was also an anti-government gathering outside Tehran University. Protesters there were later outnumbered by pro-government counter-demonstrators. There were 4,000 government supporters out on the streets in Tehran alone, and many more took part in other rallies around the country. They carried flags and banners backing Iran's supreme leader. These were annual pre-planned rallies originally meant to mark the end of the 2009 anti-government protests in a sign of solidarity for the current leadership. But they coincide with this latest wave of anti-government protests, like this one in Kermanshah on Friday. This all began as small demonstrations against the rising prices of basic food items, but they quickly turned political and violent at times. Video on social media shows protesters again clashing with police. At least 50 people have been arrested, although Iran's state TV says most were later released. And in a tweet, President Trump has called on the Iranian government to respect the rights of its people to protest. There seems to be a lot of anger about the country's economy surfacing, and protesters also seem undeterred by the police crackdown. We'll have to wait and see tomorrow if these protests continue. Molly?
Katie Logan in London, thank you. President Trump also speaking out on Robert Mueller, telling the New York Times he believes the special counsel is, quote, going to be fair in his investigation into Russia and the Trump campaign. Ellison Barber has the latest from Washington. Ellison.
Hi, Molly. That's right. President Trump told the New York Times in part he believes special counsel Robert Mueller will treat him fairly, but he also said it'll be better for the country once the special counsel investigation is, in his words, worked out. He also said he believes the, quote, real stories have to do with Democrats who worked with Russians during the campaign. The latest report from the New York Times suggests the Russian investigation did not begin with the now notorious dossier, which was reportedly funded in part by the DNC. Instead, the report says the Russia investigation began because of information Australia gave the U.S. in regards to former Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos. But the dossier is what many Republicans have focused on.
It's been reported that this dossier was all dressed up by the FBI, taken to the FISA court, and presented as a legitimate intelligence document, that it became the basis for granting a warrant to spy on Americans. I think that's exactly what happened. And if it did, it is as wrong as it can be, and people who did that need to be held accountable.
Fox News obtained a letter from House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes. It's addressed to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Nunes is requesting more documents related to the dossier. The Intel chair says the Department of Justice and the FBI have failed to turn over documents and witnesses despite August subpoenas. Nunes ends the letter by saying, quote, at this point, it seems the DOJ and FBI need to be investigating themselves. For weeks now, Republicans have criticized top officials at the FBI and DOJ. Last month, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz took to the House floor and said special counsel Robert Mueller needs to lose his job. When asked about the latest New York Times report, Gaetz said this.
The Papadopoulos storyline also seems to show that there was no desire by President Trump or the senior officials in his campaign to engage in any sort of collusion or information sharing. Collusion did happen where you had the DNC paying for the dossier and then that money finding its way into the hands of Russians telling lies about our president.
Democrats say Republican attacks on the FBI and DOJ are part of an effort to discredit the special counsel's investigation and anything that investigation might turn up. Molly?
All right, Ellison Barber in Washington, thank you. The State Department releasing nearly 3,000 emails from Hillary Clinton aide Huma Abedin. The FBI discovered them on her estranged husband's laptop toward the end of the 2016 campaign. Garrett Tenney has more on this story from Washington.
The State Department has released about 2,800 of Huma Abedin's emails, and of those, so far we know of at least 5 that contained classified information. These emails cover about a 4-year span of Hillary Clinton's time as Secretary of State, and the bulk of them are about the logistics of Clinton's schedule and travel plans, along with notes for her meetings with world leaders. But even a lot of those rather mundane emails are heavily redacted. As for the 5 emails the State Department later deemed to be classified, 4 of those are almost entirely redacted, but the other includes talking points for a phone call with Saudi Arabia's foreign minister in November of 2010, which was largely to warn him about WikiLeaks' plans to publish sensitive communications between the U.S. government and our allies. The guidance suggested Clinton say, quote, "I deeply regret the likely upcoming WikiLeaks disclosure, and I seek your help in preventing WikiLeaks from undermining our mutual national interest." This new batch of emails are from Huma Abedin's private email accounts, not her emails with state.gov, and they were discovered by the FBI in a laptop that she shared with her husband, Anthony Weiner, while he was being investigated for sexting with a minor. Judicial Watch filed a lawsuit for the emails to be released, and this morning, the group's president said they are again calling on the Justice Department to take action.
I think 4.5 million people with with security clearances that allow them access to classified information such as this. They all know what the rules are, and I guarantee you most of them are upset that Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin got away with these outrageous violations of the law.
This summer, former FBI Director James Comey testified on Capitol Hill that investigators chose not to recommend any charges against Abedin because they believed she didn't know that what she was doing was against the law. Molly?
Garrett Tenney in our nation's capital, thank you. And right now, frigid temperatures blanketing parts of the country, creating dangerous conditions for those on the roads ahead of this holiday. We have your New Year's Eve forecast straight ahead. Plus, terrorism fears have police taking precautions for first night celebrations tomorrow. We go live to Times Square, where officials say revelers have nothing to fear, but concerns still remain.
It's going to be one of the most well-policed, best protected events at one of the safest venues in the entire world.
You know, when there's a mass of people somewhere, people can just come and decide to throw something at us, you know.
The presence isn't too overwhelming, but we feel protected. You know, we got our kids with us, and we really don't, me personally, I don't foresee anything negative or anything impacting us here.
Frigid cold will make for dangerous conditions for anyone planning to be outdoors to ring in the new year tomorrow night in central and eastern parts of the U.S. That winter weather already causing problems in parts of the country. A blizzard in Montana forcing drivers to abandon their cars after sliding off the roadway. And snow also being blamed for causing this 20-car pileup in Michigan. Meteorologist Adam Klotz joining us now to tell us just what we can expect as we welcome 2018. Adam?
Hey there, Molly. One of the biggest stories is the temperatures that are spreading across the country. Incredibly cold. An Arctic blast with current temps. This is the northern plains, so you're talking about areas like North Dakota, where temperatures are getting down into the -15 to -20 range. This is actual air temperature. If you add in the wind, that does make it feel even colder outside. And take a look at some of these numbers, dropping down to the -30 range. In some cases, getting up closer in International Falls, always one of the coldest spots, close to -40 degrees at this point. All of this cold air is going to be settling in, and we're going to be seeing it more widespread across the east here in the next 24 to 36 hours. Currently, we are tracking a little bit of snow moving across portions of the mid-Atlantic, stretching up to New England. This isn't the biggest concern, though. It is going to be those temperatures. That's the biggest story moving forward. This is an hour-by-hour wind chill forecast. It's taking you from 10 p.m. tonight all the way through into your New Year's Day. Here it is in motion, and you see some of that very cold air beginning to settle in, becoming more widespread. Now taking you to very early on New Year's Day, so you're through midnight at 2 a.m. Temperatures by and large down into the negatives. -2 degrees in New York City, but stretching you off towards the west, 15 below in Indianapolis. Look at Des Moines. 33 degrees below, 22 degrees below in Chicago. Very cold air, especially in the heart of the country, but making its way all the way to the coast as well. Obviously going to be huge crowds here in New York City in Times Square. So when that ball drops, 1 million folks, maybe a good idea to be in the middle of that, avoid some of the wind. But temperatures will be right around 10 or 11 degrees. That'll be right at the second coldest New Year's Eve ball drop we've ever seen. Wind chill there at -2 degrees. Unfortunately, if you were thinking it's going to warm up once you get through the New Year's holiday, that isn't going to be the case. Forecasted highs on the day on New Year's Day, you're looking at only there into the teens. Again, this isn't the wind chill. These are actual numbers. It stays cold on Tuesday. It stays cold on Wednesday. And unfortunately, this is the last graphic I'll leave you with, but we have this Arctic air that's just plummeting down into North America. I'm running you now into January 3rd, but eventually here I'm going to run you all the way to January 9th. And you just continue to see this very active pattern, Molly. It is going to be cold, a cold start here to the new year.
Absolutely. It looks brutal out there. Everybody needs to bundle up.
Yes,
Adam, thank you for the warning. All right, well, from smaller communities to bigger cities across the nation, authorities are making security preparations for the crowds that are going to gather tomorrow evening for New Year's celebrations.
As you can see, this is not our first rodeo. We're a well-oiled machine, and we have incredible leadership in our public safety officials to make sure that we're doing all we can to keep our city safe.
There will be additional deployment. Collaboration is everything.
That is the word from San Francisco officials after an alleged Christmas Day terror attack planned on that city was thwarted with the arrest of this man earlier this month. In New York, security is very tight as more than 1 million people are expected to brave the cold and descend upon Times Square to watch the ball drop and ring in 2018. That is where we find Brian Yanis. He's been stationed there throughout the day, watching all the preparation get underway. Brian?
Hi, Molly. Well, look, the NYPD says there's no specific credible threat to Times Square or to New York City. They say it's going to be safe, and frankly, this event is going to be more secure than it's ever been. They've deployed more vapor wake dogs than they ever have. These dogs work in tandem to sniff out bombs in the air and on people. There will be multiple and more heavy weapons teams in Times Square than ever before. There'll be sand trucks, more than 60 positioned around Times Square to form a protective perimeter against possible vehicular attacks. 1,000 security cameras, aviation teams, radiation detection, and by the way, every single person who comes out here will be checked at least twice. Now, this isn't just here in New York City. Las Vegas, obviously just a couple of months after the worst U.S. mass shooting in U.S. history, has added snipers to their observation teams for the first time, and there are double the number of National Guard troops on the ground right now on the Las Vegas Strip than in previous years. Not only is it just security, though, you just heard Adam with the weather. 10 degrees is the forecast here. That means a wind chill below zero, and people out here are going to be standing in that for hours. The NYPD has released a hypothermia bulletin for their police officers in which they remind police officers the symptoms of hypothermia, things like fumbling hands and memory loss, exhaustion, severe shivering. You know, hypothermia can set in as soon as your temperature drops to below 95 degrees. We spoke to organizers here in Times Square about whether or not they're concerned this weather is going to affect attendance.
When it's warmer, people come out earlier in the day to get their good spot. My guess is that this year people will come out a little bit later in the day, closer to 4 or 5 or 6 p.m. They'll still have to wait a while, so they'll have to really bundle up. And of course, we'll warm your spirits with some great entertainment.
Warm your spirits. Yep. No heat lamps, no bathrooms, and you are stuck where you are standing in secure pens for hours on end. But hey, once in a lifetime opportunity for many people out here. Molly.
All right. I know this takes a ton of work to make it all happen. Are they ready for tomorrow night?
Yeah, well, if you take a look behind me, you can already see just some of the stages, as well as obviously thousands of tourists who are already out here just enjoying it. The ball drop happened. They tested it out today. You remember the last thing they would want is that ball not to actually drop tomorrow in front of 1 billion people on TV. They tested that out. So everything appears to be ready from what we can see. They've even tested the confetti, and also, remember, there's going to be some 25 million pieces of confetti that'll fall on people. So the spirits are high. The equipment seems to be working, and we're ready to bring on 2018. And by the way, Molly, I have to tell you, it's so festive out here. We even saw a marriage proposal earlier. If you can take a look at this video, this is Rudy proposing to Jennifer. They're both from the Bronx. This happened here in Times Square. A beautiful way to bring in the new year. We can confirm that Jennifer said yes, they are newly engaged. A wonderful way to bring in 2018. And obviously you can tell the crowd here, everyone's very festive and really into what's going to happen here just a few hours from now, tomorrow. Molly.
I love it. She will always remember that. Congratulations to Rudy and Jennifer. And thank you, Brian, for braving the cold and bringing us that report. We really appreciate it. All right, well, Fox News Channel is your New Year's Eve headquarters starting tomorrow night through the early hours of 2018. We will bring in the new year with you, kicking it off at 8 p.m. Eastern. FNC's Ed Henry alongside FNC contributor Lisa Booth and actor Dean Cain. They're going to kick off the festivities. We're calling this Countdown to 2018. And then at 10 p.m. Eastern, the party ramps up with the All-American New Year that is co-hosted by Fox News and Fox Business personalities Kennedy and Jesse Waters, live from Times Square right here in New York City. Well, will a challenger to Vladimir Putin be stopped from running in the Russian election? The country's highest court now weighing in. Plus, the census releasing new numbers on immigration, the trends they show, and what it could mean for those who want to overhaul that system.
What is the undocumented population and how we fix that problem? And then reach over to those who are coming in legally and say, how do you maximize the benefit to your new home country?
Decision to bar an opposition leader from running against President Vladimir Putin in March's election. Alexei Navalny has been banned from running due to a fraud conviction his supporters believe was politically motivated. He is now calling for a boycott of the election. Putin has an 80% approval rating back home and is expected to easily win a fourth term in office. President Trump has argued that the U.S. needs to overhaul its immigration system. Now, new data from the Census Bureau appears to support that. National correspondent William LaJeunesse has the details from Los Angeles.
For decades now, U.S. immigration rules have been based on an outdated system.
A system the president wants to overhaul next year. A new report prepared by the conservative-leaning Center for Immigration Studies based on census data promises to help shape that debate.
Everybody wants to come to the United States, and quite frankly, the United States can be choosy about who it admits.
The report shows in 2016 an estimated 1.8 million legal and illegal immigrants settled in the U.S., the most ever in a single year, and 53% higher than just 5 years ago.
So the real debate now is, what should legal immigration look like? And I'll make you a prediction: in about 5 or 6 weeks, we're going to have to deal with that as you start to face the DACA expiration.
Reasons cited by the report for the jump in President Obama's last year: more guest workers and foreign students, virtually no interior or worksite enforcement, a surge in Central American women and children, and for the first time, spouses of visa holders were allowed to work, encouraging those still overseas to join new immigrants already here.
Family immigration has a huge multiplier effect. 70% of all immigrants, according to the White House, in the last decade have entered through family-based visas, and we're seeing the effects of it today.
This graph shows where immigrants are coming from. Comparing 2005 to 2015, Mexican immigration is cut in half, from 400 to under 200,000. Central Americans up by 100,000. Asian immigration almost doubled, and twice as many immigrants from Africa and the Middle East. From Europe, that immigration was flat.
What you really need to do is understand what is the undocumented population and how we fix that problem, and then reach over to those who are coming in legally and say, how do you maximize the benefit to your new home country, the United States?
The drop in Mexican immigration was dramatic. However, it also means the U.S. is deporting fewer Mexicans. Wednesday, the Mexican Interior Ministry said President Trump removed 26% fewer Mexicans than Obama in 2016. The report doesn't take a political position, but with the economy growing and the birth rate slowing, Congress may be more concerned about who emigrates to the U.S. than how many. In Los Angeles, William LaJeunesse, Fox News.
A solemn tribute for Americans killed in mass shootings. How one man is making sure no victim is forgotten. Plus, the Trump agenda facing an uphill battle in 2018. Can the president work both sides of the aisle to get things done? We break it all down as the Fox Report rolls along this Saturday.
We have more legislative victories than any other president, not including this, but this is the capper, because this is, again, the biggest tax cut, biggest reform of all time.
As President Trump closes out his first year in office, he will be forced to increasingly rely on Congress, including Democrats, to get things done. But will that be possible in an election year, especially considering the problems Republicans had on health care and tax reform? Let's bring in Sarah Westwood, White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Thank you for being here to close out 2017 as we head into 2018. We appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
So kicking things off, as we look ahead, especially even to the first month of January, there are some big challenges. Of course, they want to get the government funded, move forward. And it seems that immigration is being blended into that. Democrats have said they won't be willing to sign this spending bill unless they see some sort of deal regarding the Dreamers. Meanwhile, the president has said no deal on DACA unless he gets what he wants on immigration, the wall, an end to chain migration, ending the visa lottery program. So the big question is, who will bend?
That's the billion-dollar question. There's really no way to know the answer for that. You know, a few weeks out, January 19th is the deadline for the government to shut down unless funding is extended beyond that. And Democrats haven't really laid out what their set of asks will be when it comes to immigration. President Trump has been really clear about what Republicans want, like you mentioned. They want to build the wall. They want an end to the diversity visa lottery program. They want to introduce a more merit-based system to the legal immigration side of the equation, as well as put more of these enforcement mechanisms in place for the illegal immigration side of the equation. Democrats have not been as clear and coherent about what they want when it comes to DACA, except to legislate the protections that already exist under the Obama program that'll be going away in March. So until we know what Democrats actually want, it'll be hard to see whether this is something that could easily be tacked on to the spending bill if Republicans were to bend, or if this is something that needs to be legislated separately.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, and a lot of people have criticized DACA, the Dreamers, as being a bargaining chip. The president and his party ending the year on a pretty high note, passing tax reform, but the leader Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell expects a more bipartisan year ahead, and he's talked about this very slim margin that Republicans have in the Senate in particular. Will the GOP be forced to reach across the aisle more going into the new year simply because they don't have much of a choice?
Right. It'll be something that comes out of necessity. The GOP margin in the Senate is about to get even slimmer when Doug Jones is seated in place of Luther Strange in January, meaning Republicans will have 51, Democrats will have 49. And there are really a lot of limits to what Republicans can do on a straight party line vote. They've already used the tool called reconciliation to pass tax reform. They attempted to use it to pass health care reform. That fell apart. But for most pieces of legislation, they will need to get to 60 votes, meaning they'll have to have at least 9 Democrats come on board, assuming they keep their entire caucus together on any given issue. That's a really tall order. And in an election year, it's difficult to see how they'll get there to pass any major pieces of legislation, given how much difficulty they faced in 2017 when arguably their goodwill was at its high water mark.
You brought exactly what I was thinking. The midterms they're going to creep up quicker than we even expect, and that's going to loom over everything in Washington. Is this going to be, where will the compromise be? Will they make it on infrastructure, for instance, or will, in essence, the Democrats have a sort of an extra incentive to push back, given that people are going to be heading to the polls?
Exactly. Democrats are going to be very hard-pressed to do anything that could give Trump a policy even resembling a legislative win. They don't want Republicans to have anything else to run on. It's probably why you saw them fight so hard against the tax reform bill, even though it contained elements of things that Democratic leaders have themselves pushed for in the past, because they knew this would be something that could potentially cause economic growth, something that Republicans could take back to their districts and say, look, I put more money in your pockets. I made your paychecks a little bigger, so you should vote for me again. Democrats wanted to prevent that. And so they're not going to want to negotiate on any kind of policy that could help Republicans, even one like infrastructure, where Democrats have expressed interest in doing a deal in the past.
I was just going to say, don't they run the risk of being too obstructionist, that the American people want to see some things get done, and if you just dig your feet in the whole time, you won't have anything to brag about either?
Exactly. Maybe on tax reform, that was something a little easier for Democrats to do because they've always been opposed to tax cuts for the highest income bracket. So it was consistent with past messaging. But if they take a stand against something that would ostensibly be a Democratic policy, like a debt-driven spending bill on infrastructure projects, that could backfire because it would be easy for Republicans to pull quotes from top Democrats in the past advocating for that kind of policy and say they're only opposed now because they want to obstruct the Republican agenda, because they want to obstruct the president. And it would be difficult, or at least more difficult for Democrats to make that argument credibly than it was for something like tax reform.
All right, shifting gears. Mar-a-Lago. It's warm, it's sunny, there's golf. The president seems a bit more comfortable there. He just gave this wide-ranging, rather long interview to, of all publications, the New York Times, which he's been very critical of, as you know, in the past. So if the president's able to run a little more wild, have more freedom, his staff didn't necessarily have a whole lot of input on this interview, didn't know about it ahead of time. Is it a bad thing or a good thing to see the president sort of away from his handlers and his staff speaking a little more freely?
It's certainly a double-edged sword. From the White House's perspective, it's perilous for President Trump to be in a situation where he could encounter a New York Times reporter and do an interview for an entire half hour and no one be able to intervene to provide him with a list of talking points, brush him up on his facts before he sits down for that interview. On the other hand, it is good for any president to have time to blow off some steam, to interact with friends and family in a setting that's not so formal and not so controlled. That's important for a president, Democratic or Republican. And so from that perspective, it's good for President Trump to have that time so he returns to Washington refreshed. But certainly his aides, I think, will learn to maybe watch the lunchtime hour a little more carefully.
You know what's interesting? Mar-a-Lago is a club. So and when we compare it to vacations that other former presidents have taken, for instance, George W. Bush going to the ranch, Barack Obama going to Hawaii, for instance, or Martha's Vineyard. Mar-a-Lago is a club. There are other people there. A former White House official told the Washington Post, quote, "At Mar-a-Lago, anyone who can get within eyesight changes the game." So there are members. There are hundreds of visitors a day. Many of these folks that are there, the president may very well have known for decades. So is that good or bad? His ability to mingle with potentially people that have really just known him for a long time.
There's good and bad in that, right? The good in it is that he has a chance to see his friends in a setting in which he's comfortable, and he might not have the opportunity to see those people or touch base with them until the end of his presidency, because back in Washington, his schedule is very tightly controlled by General Kelly. On the other hand, though, anyone could just purchase a membership to Mar-a-Lago and go there and know that they might have an easier time accessing the president. So that raises questions about ethics abuses or potentially lobbyists or people who have a political axe to grind trying to get access to the president through a back channel, through Mar-a-Lago. That could present a problem. So it is, again, a double-edged sword that President Trump is so easily accessible by Mar-a-Lago club members.
It is fascinating. We will see if he gives any other impromptu interviews to reporters down there in the future. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thanks.
All right, well, a new report shows 81 journalists were killed on the job worldwide this year. The International Federation of Journalists is set to release its annual kill report detailing all of these incidents. The 81 deaths would be the fewest in a decade if IFJ officials say there is still too much violence directed at the press, however. Mexico had the highest number of journalist deaths, but there were also several fatalities in conflict zones in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. And more than 250 journalists were in prison in 2017. 2/3 of them are in Turkey. Unfortunately, 2017 was a year here in our country of deadly violence in the form of mass shootings. One Illinois man has made it his mission to make sure that each of the victims is remembered and each family left behind has a reminder that someone cares. Matt Finn introduces us to the man behind Crosses for Losses.
The gut-wrenching scene of a mass shooting or terror attack, unfortunately, all too familiar these days. What's also become familiar to many are these symbols of light and empathy that seem to appear at the dark crime scenes, no matter where nationwide. Crosses with a red heart, picture, and the name of each innocent person murdered. The crosses aren't mass-produced. Each one is made by hand, here in Greg Zanis's unassuming garage in suburban Chicago.
I do this for the victims, so they get to know that somebody loves them and somebody cares.
Greg says he's handcrafted nearly 21,000 crosses. When he finds out about a shooting or attack, he gets to work, searching online and through yearbooks for victims' names and picture.
Even if you have to put a large heart, I need a heart on it.
Greg is no stranger to the heartache of losing a loved one. His father-in-law, who he says was his best friend, was robbed and murdered just a few blocks away from his house.
I'm not going to try to cry, but I mean, I found him in a pool of blood, and You know, I just relate to victims because of that, for that reason.
Greg says his father-in-law taught him to be a carpenter and ultimately provided him with a trade to make a living.
I feel that every time I do this, I'm remembering my best friend.
After Greg's father-in-law was killed, he felt compelled to make his very first cross for an innocent 6-year-old boy, a family friend killed in a gang shooting.
Got it. Got it.
Since then, Greg's taken crosses to Columbine, Orlando, Vegas, Sutherland Springs, and many more places, initially traveling on his own dime.
I went to Orlando and I didn't have any money to get back.
Since then, generous people have donated new tools and even a truck to support his mission of never forgetting a single victim. He's filled nearly 30 notebooks with the name of each individual and their family contact, so he can call to remind them they're not alone.
I'm really real good at calling people on an anniversary.
In Aurora, Illinois, Matt Finn, Fox News.
And we are getting some of the first images from a devastating fire that tore through an apartment building and took the lives of 12 people. And now investigators want to know why a required safety feature that could have prevented the flames from spreading did not properly function. And months after wildfires ravaged California's wine country, businesses are finally getting back on their feet.
Most people are very surprised. They're expecting to see charred areas, burned areas, and they're